Abraham's posterity that they should buy slaves, and decreed that those slaves would be a perpetual inheritance for their children. God recognized Abraham as the owner of slaves he had bought, commanded him to circumcise them, and Jesus ordained that whosoever dared to raise seditious doubts as to the benevolence of the institution of slavery should be cast out and scorned not only as a danger to the state, but destructive to the true nature of the gospel. God decreed by law that slavery be honored and obeyed, being his ordainment. Jesus himself established by law the relation of master and slave. A master must exercise without any weakness his authority over the slave. The master must not hesitate to punish him severely, whipping him with the number of lashes commensurate to the offense. All this, dear brethren, is made known to us by the recorded language of the Bible. Slavery is therefore a divine institution, ordered and sanctioned by God. Therefore, with all the authority invested in me by the church, I, Reverend Thornton Stringfellow of the state of Virginia, order you to honor slavery and not to discuss it on the basis of false moral premises.
Well, here's the thing. Black people are almost totally Europeanized to begin with. To leave the religions would be a blessing for our struggle, to do away with all of them. But being a realist as I am, I know that most folk are not going to abandon their religions because their religions are far more important to them than just something to believe in. Many people's psychological health is tied up in their religions. The church has gotten a lot of black people through tough times. The masjid has gotten a lot of black people through tough times. Would we be better off without the religions? Of course. But I also understand that the church and the mosque for many black people is a crutch that keeps them able to function on a day-to-day basis. And as a psychologist, I cannot take a crutch away from any person unless I know that they have the resources to carry on after I take that crutch away. So what we have to do in the African community is create services so that when our people walk out of the church and walk out of the masjid, they still have a secure safety net that can catch them and help provide for them. But to take away a psychological crutch, because that's really what it is. The church isn't really about religion, it's about that psychological support that people need. The masjid isn't really about religion, it's about that psychological support that they need. I've had dozens of people tell me I don't come here because of what they believe. I come here because of what I get from it, the fellowship, the brotherhood, the sisterhood. There's more to it than just the belief system. There's more to it than just the dogma. Some people don't even know the dogma. So what I'm saying is, although I'm a fan for eliminating the religions, I understand that they do have some utility for our people. And as such, if people are going to belong to the religions, as the Honorable Marcus Garvey said, as Dr. Ben said, as Dr. Clark said, turn them into an instrument of your liberation. If you're going to keep it, transform it. Expecting black people to give up their religions at this point in our sojourn in this country, I don't see it happening in my lifetime. Until they give up the religions, what I'm advocating is that they turn those religions into a revolutionary force. You can use anything for good or for bad. The problem with Christianity is that it's been used for bad. The problem with Islam is that it's been used for bad. The problem with most religions in the black community is that they've been used for bad. You could also turn them around and use them for good. Muhammad Ahmed used Islam to defeat the European in the Sudan. Malcolm X used Islam as a vehicle to black nationalism. Honorable Elijah Muhammad did the same thing. Marcus Garvey was a Christian, but he did not Christianize his movement, but you have examples of Christians such as in slavery and Reconstruction using their religion as a galvanizing force for the black struggle. So we will be better off without it, but if we're going to keep it, at least use it for the good of the people. But I also want to say one other thing. African traditional religion, which is probably a misnomer because they're really not religions, aren't dogmatic. They're really African spiritual systems. People often call them ATR, African traditional religion, which gives the false impression that they're based on dogma, like the major religions are. African traditional religions aren't based on dogma. They're not based on having some central figure who must dictate to you your destiny. They're based on you creating your own spiritual path with guidance from the priests and the priestesses. So it's a totally different approach to building a relationship with the universe and with God. That I'm totally for. It's different for everybody. Meditation can take on a million forms. Prayer can take on a million forms. And the beauty with African traditional religion, you can create whatever your form is. Somebody might meditate by reciting a mantra. Somebody else might meditate by listening to music. Somebody else might meditate, you know, by brainstorming on a notepad. Me, I just like to get quiet and listen. Earlier today, right here on this balcony, I was engaged in the meditation. You know, I use my stones, I use my beads, you know, I do some mantra, I do some visualization, I do some real deep stillness of the mind type activity. Meditation is personal. It's not like church or masjid where everybody is told to do things all the same way in unison. It is a very, very individualistic form of expression. And so the person has to develop it on their own. But to get started is to get quiet and listen. Most people can't get quiet. You know, you start off meditating 5 minutes a day. Next thing you know, you're up to 10 minutes a day. Before you know it, you can meditate for an hour. Okay? And of course, the high times to meditate is first thing in the morning or late at night, because that's normally when the spirits are at their highest point of activity, because most other living beings are at rest. So there's less negative energy in the evening because people are sleeping. So if you consider what do you call it? If you're trying to make a phone call on a cell phone, you could get interference from everybody else using their cell phone. So if you're trying to establish a connection with the universe, it's best to do it when most people are asleep, because there's less energy being put out there, which enhances your ability to establish a connection. But get quiet and listen. Find a chair, straight back chair like this, hands on your lap, feet on the ground. Okay, and again, you might start with it. You got to focus. The whole point is to focus and concentrate in an effort to still the mind. Whatever you need to do to quiet your mind is what you do. Some people use an image. Some people use a sound, a mantra. Some people focus on the sky. Some people close their mind and they do a blank stare. Whatever you have to do to still your mind. Meditation is about stopping the ceaseless flow of thought. We spend our whole life thinking, and the only way for the universe to give you divine instruction is for you to cut off the static going on in your mind called thought. And when you stop the thought, you give the universe time to come in and talk to you.
Certainly, certainly, certainly. When we talk about the issue of black religion, we have to deal with the concept of holiness. All religions claim to be holy to some degree, to be manifested with a certain energy or a power to take individuals from where they are to where they need to be spiritually. But this concept of holiness is something that is often misunderstood by lay people, and it is a concept that religions, although they claim to be the embodiment of wholeness, are totally neglectful of. The root word for holiness is to be whole. So for a religion to be whole, that means it has to deal with the whole circumference of challenges that face black people. You can't just deal with faith. You can't just deal with belief. You can't just deal with money collection. You can't just deal with Bible or Quranic study. To be holy is to deal with the whole list of problems that black people have. Simply stated, in order to be holy, you have to be dealing with the spiritual as well as the political needs of African people. But we find with most black religions, they are not holy. They do not deal with the whole spectrum of problems that affect black people. They limit themselves to one thing: preparing you to die peacefully and preparing you for life in the afterworld. And as a result of that, black people are crying out. We are spiritually destitute, we are spiritually hungry, and we are spiritually impoverished. Because when we go to the church, when we go to the mosque, when we go to the temple, we're coming out feeling no better than we did when we went in. Of course, there's a temporary feeling of euphoria. There is an emotional high that surrounds black religion. And for a little while after the service, one might feel as if they benefited from it. But just like when an alcoholic is no longer being influenced by the alcohol, or just like a cocaine user is no longer being influenced by the cocaine, once the high wears off, black people find themselves that they're right where they were when they started. Now, the spiritual poverty is very, very major. And one of the reasons why we suffer such spiritual poverty in black religion is because black religion has severed all ties with ancient African spiritual practices. Black religion has cut the umbilical cord from its spiritual parent, which is the ancient African spiritual systems. When we look at religion and compare it to spirituality, Brother Curtis, we find that there's some very distinct features of spirituality that are not embodied in religion. And there's some very distinct features of religion that are not embodied in spirituality. For example, in religion, there's a concept of paying for forgiveness. When you read the Quran, when you read the Bible, when you study the culture of Christianity, the culture of Islam, and of course we know that the culture of Christianity is heavily influenced by European Christendom because they ruled the religion for so many years, and the same thing with Islam. It is heavily influenced by Arab culture because they have basically ruled the religion for so many years, which is another issue because you cannot separate religion. You cannot separate religion from the culture that groomed it. You cannot separate religion from the culture that groomed it. And unfortunately, the culture that grooms the religion tends to pattern the religion after its own cultural belief system. So as a result of that, in Islam, you see a degree of sexism that's even higher than the degree of sexism you find in Christianity because of the sexist nature of some, but not all, Arab cultures. Very important that we recognize that. Just like in Christianity, the imagery is totally European. Why? Because it reflects the culture that nursed Christianity from its dark ages, and that would be the European culture. But let's get back to some of these differences. In religion is the concept of paying for forgiveness, the concept of tithes. In Islam, the concept of giving 1/5 of what you earn to the church, okay, or the masjid, in an attempt to expiate some of your sins. There's all types of sayings in black religion that talk about how you have to pay your way out of sin. But when you deal with spirituality, money is irrelevant. Money plays no role in spirituality. One may choose to spend their money for righteous causes, but the spending of money and the giving away of money in and of itself does not expiate one person from their sins. And unfortunately, we have a situation now where rich people have come to believe that they are sinless. How is it that so many rich people have come to believe that they are sinless? It's because they have been nurtured in religious systems that say the more money you give, the less accountable you are for your errors. So you have a lot of rich black people who are giving millions of dollars to churches in exchange for freedom from their sins, which couldn't be furthest from the truth, because both Muhammad, Jesus, Moses, all of these spiritual leaders who black people believe in and follow have argued repeatedly the point that it would be easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter heaven, which is ironic that we see so many black rich people who think they're going to heaven because they've given so much money away to the church, which is by design. Churches are businesses. Black people have a hard time accepting this. The masjid is a business. The Roman Catholic Church is a business. The Baptist Temple is a business. And most of the New Age black nationalist religions are also businesses. They exist to make money. And because they exist to make money, they always put features within the belief system that feeds the capitalistic agenda. Also in religion, we are taught that you have to find God. You must go on a search for God. But in spirituality, you simply are taught that you have to become aware of the pre-existing relationship you already have from the Creator. So there is no search for God because you are already one with God. You simply have to grow into the consciousness and awareness of your oneness with all that is, with your oneness with being, with your oneness with the supreme ruler of the universe. Now, the interesting things that religions do is they create a system where they put themselves between you and God. They put themselves between you and God, so the preacher becomes your attorney for God. The imam becomes your attorney for God. The temple leader becomes your attorney for God. Just like when you go into court, you need to have an attorney to argue your case to the judge, okay? Religion have set up the same sort of a judicial system when it comes to getting into paradise, where they teach you have to have an attorney in order to argue on your behalf to God that you have a right to the afterlife. And so the preacher is your attorney. The imam is your attorney. And they have very skillfully convinced black people, that you have to belong to a church, you have to belong to a mosque, you have to belong to a temple in order for you to be on God's good side, which is interesting because most of these institutions, because they're not holy, many of them are not even on God's good side. So how in the hell is it necessary for me to belong to an institution that isn't doing God's work in order for me to be at peace with God? It makes absolutely no sense. Now, religions rule black people through the medium of fear. If you don't understand fear, you can't understand black religion. And this is another big difference between the ancient African spirituality taught by our ancestors and what is being taught in the church, in the mosque, and all other temples. And I refer to the church, I'm talking about all black religions, not just Christianity. But they use fear. They inoculate and intimidate their followers with fear. And this fear is so debilitating, Brother Curtis, that the fear takes over the common sense and intellectual process of black people to the point where you are afraid to do what? Question the nonsense that you are being fed. You are terrified about questioning the possibility that maybe Muhammad is not the prophet of God. You are terrified about questioning the possibility that maybe what you're reading in the Bible is not the words of Jesus Christ. You are terrified about questioning the possibility that maybe the name Allah is not the only name for God. Okay, maybe Jesus was not the only Son of God, but you're terrified. Why? Because the church and the mosque have taught black people that to question the doctrine, to become curious about the dogma, okay, is to earn God's displeasure, which means what? Religions are institutions of ignorance. And I know some of the listeners are going to have a hard time swallowing this pill, but in order for us to wake up, we have to get out of our paralysis of analysis. We are afraid to analyze the different systems and processes and leaders and behaviors that we see amongst the race. And in order for us to get from where we are to where we need to be, in order to make material progress, political progress, spiritual progress, economic progress, we first have to make intellectual progress. We have to improve our ability to think and think deeply about everything. And one of the things that we have to analyze is how religions function by way of the ignorance of its followership. Simply believe what I'm telling you. Don't question it. I was raised Islamically. My father was a Sunni Muslim, still is. I was a Sunni from birth until my 10th grade year. Then my father became a follower of the Shia tradition of Islam. My mother's family, so that's my paternal side. My maternal side, they were Christian. I have an uncle who's a minister. My paternal grandmother, my father's mother, who is the one of the great nieces of Frederick Douglass, she's a Jehovah's Witness. One of my paternal aunt's husbands, he was a member of the 5% Nation. I've had members of my family who are members of the Nation of Islam. So I've had a little bit of everything within my family system. And growing up, one of the things that always fascinated me, because I've always been a deep thinker. That's why I decided to become a psychologist, because I just love to think about the mind and study the way people behave. But as a young child, Brother Curtis, it always interested me how people would take something and believe it without any proof behind it. To take something and believe it without any proof behind it. But religion has that miraculous ability to make people believe. Why? Because people are inoculated with the fear of divine retribution for the possibility that you may not be believing in something that is true. But in spirituality, God is not this great retributionist. He's not an abuser of human beings. God does not want everyone running around being afraid of the supreme ruler of the universe. God does not function through a series of painful experiences in order to get you to recognize who the supreme ruler of the universe is. God functions on compassion, not punishment. Spirituality is about compassion, but black religion is about punishment. And then you have to look at the sexism in religion, Brother Curtis. And this sexism I find in nearly every black religion, whether it is a new age, black nationalist religious cult, or whether it's a traditional religious a movement, whether it's Orthodox Islam or Christianity. There's really no role for the female. There's really no role for the woman in the church. There's really no role for the woman in Islam. There's really no role for the women in any of the religions that black people pretty much belong to, except the African traditionalist religion. So those who practice the Kemetic system, the Dogon, Yoruba, okay, you see that feminine principle. But Islam doesn't deal with a feminine principle. Christianity doesn't deal with a feminine principle. Now, some people would say, well, how can that be, Brother Umar? Isn't the church 85% women? Aren't black women converting to Islam every day? Yes, they are. I didn't say you couldn't be a woman and be a member. I didn't say you couldn't be a woman and be a member, but I said, where is the role for the feminine principle in the religion? In most black religions, the black woman is simply a slave to be used at the beck and call of the man, whether it's a sex slave, whether it's a kitchen slave, whether it's a house slave, whether it's a church slave, but your job is to follow the orders of your slave master, who happens to be the other men, and of course, the imam or the preacher. So the woman is a slave in black religion. And it's very important that African people begin to recognize this. And one of the reasons for the degradation of the feminine principle in black religion is because our religions that we have, no matter how much we try to fine-tune them, we did not get African versions of those religions. We have the European versions of those religions. See, there's an African interpretation for Islam. How do I know that? Because when I'm in Africa, visiting with brothers who practice Islam, their Islam is totally different from Negro Islam. Their Islam does not cut out the feminine principle. Their Islam does not do away with their traditional cultural practices. You see the same thing in African Christianity. Although I do have a problem that in African Christianity you do see a lot of white images, it's still there. But you still see a respect for traditional African cultural practices. You still see libation. You still see veneration to the ancestors. They did not cut that out on the continent. But over here, coming after 243 years of slavery, we have cut the umbilical cord that once fed African religion a steady dose of African spiritual nutrition. So black religions are suffering from spiritual nutricide. Black religions are suffering from spiritual nutricide. And if Christianity or Islam is going to be of any benefit to black people, it has to reconnect itself to the ancient African spiritual practices that our elders once upheld. Extremely important. Beliefs in dogma do not help people. Beliefs in dogma do not help people. I accept that there's one God and there's no other God and Muhammad is his messenger. Okay, that's your belief. I respect that. But guess what? That ain't treating your followers' depression. That's not healing that marriage that two of your believers are into that is being threatened with divorce. That belief ain't affecting that. Okay? It has nothing. Muhammad was the last prophet. Jesus was the Son of God. Okay, that's fine and well. But how is that going to treat the spiritual poverty of your flock? It doesn't treat it at all. And the problem, Brother Curtis, is that black religion, its central component is dogma. Black religion is 85% dogma, spiritual nutricide. Dogma doesn't help nobody. All dogma does is drive wedges between black people who believe something and other black people who don't believe it. That's all dogma does. It creates a narrow-minded view of everything. It breeds a certain religious arrogance. It breeds a certain type of religious supremacy. And so now that I'm Muslim, I go out into the world with the Quran, and I think I'm better than everybody else. There might be an elder there who is not a Muslim, But because I'm Muslim, I believe that I'm more right and exact than he is, and he's old enough to be my great-grandfather. Just because somebody told me at the mouth that we are right and everybody else is wrong. You see the same thing in Christianity, the exact same thing. If you don't believe in this book, you are not on God's side. Where is the proof for that? And one of the shortcomings of our religion, one of the reasons why we have this dogmatic, conquering mentality as it relates to converting people, is because when you look at Christianity and Islam and how it's been used on black people, you'll see that it was forced on black people. It was forced on black people in slavery. It was forced on black people in Africa. And I know a lot of my Sunni Muslim brothers, bless their soul, they're still defending the Arab invasion of North Africa. There's still a sizable proportion of Orthodox African-American Muslims who are defending Arabs, claiming that Islam did not come into North Africa by way of bloodshed. And to them, I would only direct them to the scholarship of African scholars who lived during the Arab invasion of Islam. I'm not talking about people, historians who went back and studied. I'm talking about read the words of Africans who lived in North Africa at the time of the Arab invasion in the 6th and 7th century, and they tell you that the Arabs massacred millions, desecrated the culture, destroyed statues. They did the exact same thing that the Europeans would do a couple hundred years after them. No difference. But we're defending Arabs. Why? Because Islam was nurtured by the Arab. Can you have Islam without Arabism? Of course you can. But if you're going to take out the Arabism in Islam, you're going to have to put the Pan-Africanism back in. If you're going to take the Arabism out of Islam, you got to put the Pan-Africanism back in. Why do I say that? Because some people are probably saying to themselves, Brother Curtis, why can't you just have Islam without any culture? Why? Because all religion is nursed in a cultural incubator. All religion is nursed in a cultural incubator. Muhammad was an Arab. Yes, he was an African who was an Arab, but he was still an Arab. So Islam was nursed in the cultural incubator of Arab culture. Christianity, when it was taken from the African priests and bishops and stolen by the Europeans and Emperor Constantine, they took that religion and they nursed it in the incubator of white supremacy. You can't have religion without a cultural medium. Just like you can't have a human being without oxygen, you can't have a religion without a cultural incubator. It is ridiculous for black people to think that you can practice Islam free of culture. You can practice Christianity free of culture. And with African traditional religions, you see that you can't practice religion free of culture, but they don't try to hide it. They don't try to lie about it. In the Yoruba, in the Dagara, in the Dogon, they let you know the culture and the religion go hand in hand. The culture and the religion go hand in hand. But the Muslim is trying to act like Arabism is not a part of modern-day Islam. And the Christian is trying to act like white supremacy is not a part of modern-day Christianity. It has to be, because it was nurtured in those cultural incubators. See, we are taught that there's a fixed system of worship in religion. If you're Muslim, you pray 5 times a day. If you're Christian, you go to Bible study, you go to church on Sunday, you read your Bible at home, but there's a fixed system. With spirituality, Brother Curtis, there is no fixed system. Everybody creates their own because we are all unique. We are spiritual beings having a human experience. We are unique. So guess what? Brother Curtis may pray in the morning. Brother Umar may pray at night. Brother Curtis meditates in the afternoon. Brother Umar meditates late at night. Brother Curtis only reads ancient African spiritual scriptures. Brother Umar might read the Bible or the Quran from time to time because he gains something out of that. Brother Curtis may not pour libations. Brother Umar pours the libations. It is unique to you, whatever it is you have to do to build that relationship. Some Africans choose to deal with the Ogun, the ancestral realm, to talk with their ancestors. Other Africans may choose not to do that. But it is what? Based on what you need in order to reach what? God consciousness. God consciousness. To become one with God. To become one with God is to become holy. The creation and the creator are one, Brother Curtis. They are holy. Where the man, the masculine principle, marries his queen, the woman, the feminine principle, the two halves, the yin and the yang, the numerator and the denominator, have become holy, which is another issue, Brother Curtis, because many black religions, because they are Obamaites, which is a contradiction, because you cannot be a follower of Muhammad or Jesus and be for the government. You cannot be a follower of Muhammad or Jesus and be for any government on earth, because both of them spoke against the inherent evil of conquering governments. So you cannot say, I'm for the President of the United States and be for Jesus. I'm for the President of the United States and be for Muhammad. It's a contradiction. It's a hypocrisy. But here's the point. Here's the issue. In order for a man to be holy, he got to get married. In order for a woman to be holy, she got to be married. That's African culture. That predates religion. Now, we know every religion teaches the same thing, but that comes from our culture. So then we have to ask ourselves something. If holiness can only be achieved by becoming one with God and by becoming one with your mate, how is it that the church has accepted homosexuality? How can the church accept homosexuality, Brother Curtis, if holiness, to become whole, is to join in marriage with a member of the opposite sex? How can you support marriage between two masculine principles? How do you support marriage between two feminine principles? If the vagina must meet with the penis for the ankh or everlasting life to be created, how can you support a system of marriage where the yin is not coming in with the yang, where the masculine is not marrying the feminine? How do you support that? That means your religion can't be holy. In fact, not only is the religion not holy, Brother Curtis, it becomes an agent of the devil, which is to do evil. Because to support homosexuality is to do evil or to become the devil. And so black people have to begin to analyze these religious systems because they're more evil than they are righteous. See, the goal of religion is to teach the superiority of a certain belief. The goal of spirituality is to nurture oneness with your Creator. The goal of religion, superiority of belief, spirituality, oneness with your Creator. See, religion, Brother Curtis, to be effective for black people, the reason why it doesn't work is, number one, as we stated, it's not holy. It doesn't deal with the whole spectrum of problems. But number two, in order for a religion to work for any people, it must be partial to that people.
Yes, sir.
In order for religion to work for any people, it must be partial to that people. Europeans used Christianity to enslave Africans. Arabs used Islam to conquer North Africa. Our African brothers and sisters who teach African traditional religions, they use it to improve upon the culture and improve upon the unity of the diaspora. It must be partial. The problem is Islam is not partial to black people. It's partial to the Arab agenda. Christianity is not partial to black people. It's partial to white supremacy. And that's why black people are not holy when they go to church and when they go to the mosque, Brother Curtis. Why? Because I come here to build a relationship with God. But in order to fight against police brutality, I got to go somewhere else. I come here to worship God. But in order for me to do something about my husband who's beating on me at night, I got to go to Women Against Rape. I come here to deal with God. But if I need help for my son who's in jail for a crime he didn't commit, I got to go find a white lawyer to represent him. I come here to worship God. But guess what? If I have been a victim of molestation at the hands of a blood relative, I can't go to my pastor, to my imam, because they too cowardly to do anything about it. I have to go somewhere else. Look at that, brother. You have to split the institutions up because the church and the mosque don't want to deal with anything else except collecting your money and preparing you for the afterlife. It's amazing how they claim to be against evil but do nothing about it in the black community. Interesting. Religion is about the masculine principle. Very interesting. Religion is about the masculine principle. Spirituality is about the balance of the masculine and the feminine principles, religion has a limited concept of God. It's limited. Okay? You are given a picture of God in your mind. In Islam, they say that God has 99 names. There's 99 names for God. Well, guess what? I got news for people. There is no limit to the amount of names that God can have, because to limit the names for God is to limit God. There's no name that can properly define the unnameable. Allah isn't sufficient. You can use it if you want. Jehovah isn't sufficient. You can use it if you want. Elohim, Aladumare isn't sufficient. You can use it if you want. Ptah isn't sufficient. You can use it if you want, but don't say there's 99 names, and after that, that's it. Well, if each word has roughly a dozen synonyms, that means 99 times 12 is going to give you a whole lot more than 99. But this is what we're taught, and we don't question this nonsense. Jesus, God, Yahweh, says who? These are simply names that people gave to try to capture a concept that cannot be captured. You can never truly understand the unnameable. You can simply only continue to increase your conscious understanding of the unnameable. That's the problem. In religion, you got to have a leader. In spirituality, you need no leader. There is no go-between. You never have to go to church. You never have to go to the mosque. And do you know why a lot of people spend so much time in religious institutions in the first place? Because they're looking for holiness. They're not whole. And they believe by going there and being around other individuals who believe what they believe, they can sooner or later become convinced of the accuracy of this inaccurate belief system. Why are so many women in church? Churches are meccas for single black women. You know why they're there? They're trying to get whole. They're not necessarily trying to find Jesus. They're trying to find a husband. But see, no one's dealing with this. No one's dealing with this. I look at the African-American Islamic community, and I look at how we have this situation of serial polygamy, where you got African-American Sunni men, Muslims, not all, but a good deal, who are marrying sisters today, divorcing them 3 months later, but the only problem is she's pregnant with a seed. But you've left her and went to another woman, and now you've impregnated her. So you got situations where you got a man who may have had 12 different wives in only 6 months. 12 different wives, 12 different children, and half the women on public assistance. Polygamy is supposed to benefit the women, not the men. When you have polygamy benefiting the men more than it's benefiting the woman, that's not polygamy. That's what you call a pimping arrangement. You're simply pimping the women. Polygamy was designed to make the women holy. Why? Because marriage is a requirement in African culture. And since there's more women than there are men, in order for women to become holy, spiritually and personally, they got to get married. So polygamy was instituted to help our sisters achieve holiness, the marriage of the masculine and the feminine principle. But brothers are taking polygamy and they are abusing it, which means it is no longer holy. And then we got to talk about the psychological problems in the church and the mosque. And I'm not limiting this discussion to the church and the mosque, but I mention those two as examples because most black people in America belong to one or the other. They're either Christian or Muslim. So I use those two. But we can talk about any of the black religions except for most of the African traditionalist religions. But one of the concerns I have about all religion, all black religion, and this goes back to my principle of religion needing to be partial to the people that it serves. This is the issue. All black religions, nearly every one, is integrationist based. Yoruba, integration is based. The Kemetan system, integration is based. I believe the Dogon, integration is based. Christianity, Islam, integration is based. Okay? You have a few New Age black religions that are exclusively black, but 99.9% of all black religions on the face of the earth are integrationist based, which means non-black people can join. That's the problem. Because in order for religion to become a spiritual tool that black people can use to fulfill political as well as spiritual ends, it must be able to refuse membership to anybody who could threaten the sovereignty of black people over their own destiny. If the religion cannot refuse membership to anybody who can threaten the sovereignty that black people have over their destiny, then the religion is no good and is not holy, because it ain't going to help us achieve holiness. I got a big problem with African American Islam, a big problem with African American Christianity, and a big problem with African traditional religions, because no one has learned the essential lesson of slavery. The essential lesson of slavery is that whenever a European comes amongst you, they are coming to destroy you. And until religion accepts that and acknowledges that, we're not going to get anywhere. See, the political consciousness of black religion, Brother Curtis, is not keeping pace with the political times of black people. Narrow-mindedness. There's only one way to God. Islam says there's only one way to God. Christianity, one way to God. Judaism, one way to God. But spirituality says what? There's multiple paths to the Creator. And I'm going to throw this last concept out there because you may have something and you may have some callers, and it is this concept of monotheism. We have to deal with the differences amongst traditional African religion and spiritualities, concept of monotheism, and the Arabized and Europeanized Islam and Christianity's versions of monotheism. According to Islam and Christianity, you are largely separate from your Creator. You are largely separate. The Creator does not live in you. The Creator is not manifested in you, despite Jesus saying that the temple of God is within, despite numerous references in the Quran to the Creator being closer to man than his own life being. But you're essentially separate. You're essentially separate from God. So you're not holy. Look at that. I want people to constantly look at the lack of holiness in black religion. To be whole, to be one. Holiness is oneness. But in African spirituality, what are we taught? There's multiple paths to the same goal. Multiple paths. It don't matter what religion you belong to. The only thing that matters is the quality of the relationship you have with the Creator, the quality of your consciousness, the quality of your oneness. But in the monotheism of African spirituality, Brother Curtis, it is a diffused monotheism. What do we mean when we say diffused monotheism? It means that the Creator is diffused into all creation. God exists simultaneously as separate and alone and as part of everything on earth. That's right. It is the separate and yet companion to all that exists. God is in the trees. God is in the water. God is in the animals. God is in life. God is in a rock. God is in the house. God is in the wood. God is in the oxygen, in the wind, in the thunder, in the lightning. Europeans misunderstand this. Black people misunderstand this. They take it to mean that Africans believe in multiple creators. They believe in water. They pray to trees. They pray to ants. They pray to snakes. No, we don't. We are simply doing what? Recognizing God's presence in everything that God created. Diffused monotheism. God is one with everything that exists, that which is animate and inanimate, that which breathes and that which does not breathe. That is a far, far stretch away from what Islam and Christianity are teaching. Now, your listeners have to ask themselves one question. Which route would get me to God consciousness sooner? Would I get to God consciousness sooner recognizing that my ancestors are alive and are one with the Creator and are still in my company even now as I speak? Would it get me to the Creator closer to understand that God lives in every living and non-living thing? So the animals in my house, the plants in my house, the healing stones in my house all have a speck of God's omnipotence? That means I'm living in a holy universe, a holy world. Everything around me emanates with God's vibration. Is that going to get you closer to God consciousness? Recognizing that God is not a man or a woman, so whenever we say he or she, we are absolutely wrong, and all we're doing is reflecting the human ignorance to try to reduce the infinite, unnameable, to a finite object? Or is it better to look at God as separate? Is it better to see God as a man? Is it better to believe in a God that doesn't allow you to communicate with your ancestors, or to believe in a God who runs the world through fear and retribution. Because if you believe in a God who runs the world through fear and retribution, Brother Curtis, then you should have no problem believing in white supremacy, because it also runs the world through fear and retribution. And I'll stop there.